forget DC, let's celebrate some D-she. Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And Dear Watchers on this journey are me, girl reporter Guido.
And me, Superman's girlfriend, Rob.
Wasn't it Girl Reporter, the first story we read today?
Yeah,
I think it's Girl Reporter.
Yes, I think so. Girl Reporter.
I'll check that before we get to it.
And before we begin our trip through some more Silver Age silliness again this week, Guido, what's new in our little section of the multiverse?
Well, we are not a DC Comics podcast, even though it feels like we're becoming one. But that's in large part because we made a commitment in our 150th episode anniversary to do some more DC Imaginary Worlds. And we're really excited for July Superman. So I don't know. I don't think between now and July will be a DC exclusive comics podcast.
No, I don't think
but
so.
In researching today's episode, I stumbled upon so many things involving Supergirl. They had James Gunn had just shared that extraordinary picture that got me squealing of Supergirl sitting in the chair on the first day of production. And that makes me really excited. So we are going to have to cover a wacky Supergirl story very soon, but we're not a DC Comics podcast. In fact, there are so many what if titles on the stands right now. They're doing a big What If Galactus series. You were going to say something about DC though. What do you want to say about DC?
Well, I think I mentioned this the last episode. The thing is, we go to our local comic book store, Earthworld in Albany, and I look through the new releases and I just see some of these Silver Age titles and it's like, how can we not cover this? They just like jump off at you.
Yes. They are
It's like they say that
perfect and kooky.
Judge a book by its title or its,
no,
cover,
by its cover,
but
yes.
that is 100%
what these
books do. Yes.
You absolutely can. And yeah, so the what if there's a bunch of Galactus titles. They're pretty cool. They're doing like what if these different people, including Rogue and Gambit, were Galactus's heralds, which there was a what if in the original series about that question, but clearly they're gearing up for Galactus in the Fantastic Four movie with all of these publications. So there's a lot in the Elseworlds to explore.
And I know you are, and people might not believe this, I know you're behind on a lot of comics now. So have you been reading these new what ifs?
I'm almost 3 short boxes behind. Like my to reads are in short boxes. Usually I have like a short box and maybe a little pile on top. But I currently have 3 short boxes, so it's not going well.
So you haven't read the new what ifs then? These ones you were just talking about. Okay.
Nope. Sure have not.
For
but
a
I
change,
am looking
then
forward
you and
to
I
it.
can discover them together, because usually you've already read these like months or years in advance.
Well, I'm sure I'll preview them before we get to them, but we'll see. And maybe not. Maybe they'll be our next episode. Who knows?
Exactly. Well, if you are joining us for the first time, we have 3 parts of our journey through the multiverse today: origins of the story, exploring multiversity, and pondering possibility. So thanks for coming along.
Yes, and remember to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Find us on Blue Sky at Dear Watchers, and you can actually go through our back catalog of episodes at dearwatchers.com.
And with that, welcome to episode 152, and let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with our travels to today's alternate universe.
Maybe it'll be to get you back again, 'cause I'm your Superman. You're my Lois Lane.
I really do just want to play that whole song, and we'll explain what it is in a moment.
Well, today we have all the multiversal coverage that's fit to print as we answer the question, what if Lois Lane thought Superman abandoned her and hijinks ensue?
As they always do.
Yes.
This is our first visit to this Earth, though it's kind of 2 Earths, but it's also just our first visit to this title, which will not be a surprise to anyone who's started this episode or heard our last 2 episodes. in terms of these alternate Earths, our first DC Imaginary Earth coverage was actually Superman and Lois back in episode 51. We interviewed Lois Lane expert Tim Hanley back in episode 61. He literally wrote a book on her, and we expect him to come back soon and talk Batgirl with us because he has a new book about her. But we've actually otherwise never focused exclusively on Lois. Last episode, of course, we focused on Jimmy and his imaginary alternate universes that maybe are supposed to be canonical but make no sense. And so here we are doing it with another member of the super family.
And what is your relationship with that member of the super family, Lois Lane? Because everybody knows Lois Lane. I think we talked about this in maybe even last week's
because we said Jimmy was like the third.
Yeah,
known
like
character.
People know Batman. They probably know the name Lois Lane more than they know most superheroes. Like before the Iron Man movie came out, I would imagine much more people could name Lois than they could name Tony Stark.
Yes, I think that's true, and probably in large part thanks to Margot Kidder.
Oh,
I think
of course.
Most people agree that's an iconic performance of Lois Lane, though I have a addendum to that in a moment when I finish my background with Lois. I'd say my background with Lois, since I've always been someone drawn to female characters and sort of snarky, sassy characters at that, which she's not always been written as, but has at times, probably again thanks to Margot Kidder. She is someone who's interested me, but as we're going to explore in our history, there's not a lot of content to have gotten in on her. My era of Superman as someone growing up was around death, and at that point, prior to death, of course, she finds out Clark is Superman. Love that story. Post-death, they're married. Love that story. So she's a big part of the Superman stories that I really loved and appreciated growing up. But other than that, I mean, I don't have like a Lois Lane t-shirt or a Lois Lane action figure or anything like that. So I'd say I really appreciate the character and am a moderate fan of her. The one addendum I'll make is that I think Bitsy Tulloch's performance of Lois Lane in Superman and Lois is, sorry, Margot Kidder, better than Margot Kidder's. I think it is the best Lois Lane. I think Bitsy Tulloch raised the bar for Rachel Brosnahan, and we'll talk about what we're hoping to see from that. But I think that Lois in Superman and Lois is the Lois in my mind. So highly recommend that.
Bitsy, you guys are on nickname basis. I didn't realize that.
She goes by Bitsy. I know she's credited, but like she goes by Bitsy. I don't know what to tell you. It's I don't call you Robert.
That's true. That's true.
So what is your background with our girl reporter?
Well, very much like my background with Jimmy that I talked about on last episode, I think my entry point into Lois Lane was Teri Hatcher, actually, on Lois and Clark. And I think Teri Hatcher's performance owes a lot to Margot Kidder. And it's interesting. I think we'll get into this when we talk about today's issues, where the Lois in the issues we're talking about doesn't have that sarcastic, strong feel that then I think those later on-screen Loises do. But I think I loved, also growing up watching a lot of older movies, this was a character that kind of drew a lot from, especially in the Margot Kidder, Teri Hatcher performances of like those quick-witted, tough,
Claudette
bronze,
Colbert,
quote-unquote, kind of
Katharine Hepburn, totally.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think I always did love that aspect, and very much that performance and Margot's performance, and then later in comics, but like kind of Jimmy, even though I read some Superman comics, maybe at the time I was reading it, Lois was a little bit more off to the side. I never remember seeing her as big of a presence in the comics as, say, Mary Jane was in the Spider-Man comics that I was reading at the same time. I don't know if that's actually just like my memory or if that was actually the case.
I suspect it is, but I don't know. Who knows?
Well, that's our origin of the story, so let's go way on back to the 1930s to talk about the real origin of the story.
To get to the 1930s, we're going to take a detour via 1979, because the audio I'm suspending our usual audio for this amazing song, apparently comes off a flexi disc distributed with a Superman annual in Antigua and lost until last year, apparently. All very strange. Couldn't find a lot of information, but it's a fantastic song. So here we go on our way to origins of the story.
If I cannot cry, please explain to me why all these super tears are falling from my eyes. I can never die, so can you tell me why? Since you left me, I feel like without you, I'm dying inside.
Very emo Superman in that song. I love it.
Yeah. You know who we need to investigate the origins of that song? Lois Lane. She'd
We
find
do.
out in a second.
Well, let's go through some of her history, her creation, and her publication background.
Yeah, so Lois Lane debuted with Superman back in Action Comics #1 from June 1938. According to a 1983 Siegel and Shuster interview, writer Jerry Siegel first conceived Lois Lane in 1934 when the two were still developing Superman, and she was inspired by the Warner Brothers Torchy Blaine film series / character, who was a tough female reporter. Guido, do you know this character at all? I did not.
I know of Torchy Blaine. It's not movies I've ever watched. I don't think they're quite as revered, or maybe not even quite as good as stuff like His Girl Friday and the other sort of things we were referring to, I think.
But yeah, there still, I would gonna guess that like tough female reporter type, like that Catherine
There were so
Hepburn.
many examples of it, although some of those are actually into the 40s, so maybe they're even taking inspiration from Lois.
Totally. And in 1988, Siegel also shared that his eventual wife, Joanne Carter, was Shuster's original art model. So she was the model before they got married. They didn't get married for several more years. And he said, quote, because the name of the actress Lola Lane, who also played Torchy Blaine, appealed to me, I called my character Lois Lane. And strangely, the characterization of Lois is amazingly like the real-life personality of my lovely wife, end quote.
How nice. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And then Joanne was also like a big fighter for getting the rights and getting them
back to the
credited
family.
as well. So she had that gumption that you don't think of from Lois Lane.
Yeah, you could see that. That's very cool to know. I hope if they haven't, someone should write a biography of Joanne Carter.
Totally.
That'd be pretty cool. So in terms of comic book worlds, there's a backup series of stories. More on that in just a moment. And then Lois led 2 issues of DC's Showcase, the anthology title that would debut different ideas, characters, or concepts. And as Lois was becoming increasingly popular, she gets her own title, Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. There is a space between it, which sometimes trips you up when you're like web searching for this title.
Because does that mean that she's his female friend rather than his love
Or
interest,
maybe
I
at the
guess?
time, grammatically, girlfriend as one word was too colloquial. You know, there was a lot of like that sort of things didn't get added to the quote-unquote dictionary for some time. Maybe it's that.
True.
I'm not totally sure.
Only the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is chainsaw 2 words, not 1. Fun fact there.
I don't know why that is. So Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane debuts in 1958, runs for 137 issues, 2 annuals. Many of the issues had Lois into some fantastical hijinks a la Jimmy Olsen. Lots of competing with Lana Lang. It's a romance title, and we'll talk a lot more about it when we get into it. 80 of the first 81 issues were drawn by Captain Marvel artist Kurt Schaffenberger. In 1962, Lois is at the peak of its popularity and the 3rd best-selling comic book in the U.S. after Superman and Superboy. So
Take that,
we can
Batman.
we can see why this summer's Superman movie release is a big deal. And Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane ended 1 year after Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. The 2 titles became part of the Superman family, which ran for some time from the 70s into the 80s. And we'll have more on Lois's later comics in our 3rd segment. One thing I want to say is these titles are also not collected. It's very unusual. There's issues or stories that are put into like Lois anthologies, or they did one edition of the first 8 issues. But there has not been, for some shocking reason, an omnibus of these things. So I'm going to continue our collection of single issues because these are so fun to read.
Because a lot of them also aren't online either, right?
Right. There are about 25 maybe of the 137 issues that are digitally available on DC Universe Infinite, and it's not clear why. But that is some of the publication background that leads us to where we are today. But that's not all about
Yeah,
Lois.
of course. Well, Lois continued to be a mainstay of both comics and in TV and film, with far too much history to go into here.
I know, from the serial to
yeah.
everything. Cartoons,
In fact,
video
she's
games,
been
of
played
course.
by no less than 9 actors in live-action projects alone. That's not even counting animated projects. So there's been a lot of Lois Lanes out there.
That there have been. And we are going to start with our origin issue.
Yes, so this is Superman Volume 1, issue number 28, June 1944. It's a backup story in the issue. It's called Lois Lane, Girl Reporter, The Suicidal Swain.
Yeah, and that shocking title, I feel like we need a content warning here on this segment. The issue does not give you a content warning, but has lots of jokes about suicide, so get ready. It is written by Don C. Cameron, penciled by Ed Dobrotka, who also does the inks, edited by Jack Schiff. Don Cameron had created the Toyman, Tweedledum, Tweedledee, and Liberty Bell, also introduced Batman's Hall of Trophies and the Batboat, so big into these kind of weird things, and created Alfred as Bruce Wayne's butler. The artist, Ed Dobrotka, was one of Shuster's earliest assistants, and did the inkings for Shuster and other artists, co-created the Toyman with Don Cameron. So we can see this team is a big part of DC at this time. And we chose this story because it is, again, her first headlining story, if you will. She's, of course, been in the title, but this is the first time that she gets her own subtitle, if you will, Lois Lane, Girl Reporter, and it continues throughout Superman's series for a bit here. So why don't you summarize this really wacky story here?
Yeah. So, a man is threatening to jump from the ledge of a skyscraper, and Lois attempts to talk him down. But then Lois learns that the man was only up there because his girlfriend gave his gift of nougats to her dog. And in her ire, she can't believe this, Lois accidentally falls, but is saved by a series of awnings and eventually a net. Jimmy is impressed that Lois didn't even need Superman to save her, and the man from the ledge has come to his senses and says the next time he will only kill himself for Lois.
Yeah. Okay. So, a lot in there, but peeling back some of the layers. First of all, I thought it was really fun. I liked it. I liked the absurdity. I think we talked about this a bit on our Jimmy Olsen episode, and every time we visit these golden age comics, I think we're left with the question of, like, did the writers know what they were doing? And here, for sure, 100%. Like, the idea that he's killing himself for the dog. It's not that even... Like Lois says, "Oh, did your the person you like, marry someone else?" And he's like, "No, he just gave my."
That would have been
an
acceptable reason to jump from the ledge. But
she gave my candies to her dog. Like the writer knew what he was doing here, which is really fun. What I was struck by is how much of the other stories we read today and we're looking at considering reading are bound up in here. Like this question of like, when does Lois need Superman? How does she, does she always get saved by Superman? Is she too reliant on being saved by Superman? So it was really interesting to see that in her first solo outing, that's part of what they're exploring with her.
And in fact, Superman and Clark don't have a single appearance in this.
No, I'm sure that's
Jimmy,
intentional. Yeah.
And maybe Perry was in there, but we don't get Clark at all. So yeah, very, very interesting. I think it's a lot of fun. I think going back to what we were saying actually about that kind of tough as nails, seen it all kind of reporter. I think you get some of that, albeit in a 1940s lens. But there's that line where it's like, this broad thinks like she can talk this guy down after like 30 police officers and like 17 firemen couldn't do it. So like you get that sense of like Lois having that strong ego and thinking like, I could do whatever I can do whatever I put my mind to it, that, and kind of standing out amongst all these male figures. So I think like that is here even back in the 1940s.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. Of course, there's a lot of sexist tropes throughout, but I think you're right. She's still being written as a proto-feminist, if you will, or some certain extent, a certain type of feminist in this. And I think that is also interesting to see. I agree.
Mm-hmm. My favorite line might have been the lead cop character, like he then sees that Lois has also gotten out on the ledge, and he says, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to get up there soon, it's gonna be a threesome.
Oh, see, I thought you were gonna say my favorite is toward the end when she's falling, the cop says, I can't bear to look, Miss Lane was a fine girl, a bit difficult at times, but a fine girl. I love that he thinks she's dying, and it's really important to say, a little difficult, but yeah, so it's really a perfect
and
wacky,
I mean the last
story.
line, which is very much I think written as a joke, maybe one that hasn't stood the test of time, where like,
well,
this guy
I don't know
like,
that it was a good joke then either. I'm not sure there was ever a time in which joking about suicide was the right course
but
of action.
It is almost like it's actually more ridiculous way to end the book than end the story than the rest of the story actually was.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe the nougat is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, well, or you can just take it as the guy is kidding. But yes, it is a ridiculous way to end the book. So it's a really fun first outing for Lois Lane, girl reporter.
Well, Guido, are you ready for more Lois falling and more dogs eating things that they shouldn't? Because it's all coming up in our next issue. This is exploring multiversity.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
And this week we are asking the question, what if Lois Lane thought Superman abandoned her and hijinks ensue?
And
This
don't
is
worry, if you were looking for the song, it's going to return in the final
Okay,
segment.
thank you. This is Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, number 30 from January 1962. It's got 3 stories, or one story with, well, 2 stories with one's got 2 parts. Who knows? It's When Superman Abandoned Lois Lane, Superman's Secret Family, and the Robot Paradise.
Yes, and we chose this issue. It's not the first Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. It's not the best Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. It's not the wackiest Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. But it seemed like it balanced a few key elements, and we actually chose it before even reading the initial story, and it's got a lot of great connections. This first story, When Superman Abandoned Lois Lane, the writer's unknown, which is not too uncommon, sadly, from this era. It is penciled and inked by Kurt Schaffenberger and edited by Mort Weisinger. Kurt Schaffenberger, as mentioned earlier, known for the Marvel Family and Captain Marvel worked on Lois Lane and stayed at DC for 40 years, where his Lois work was so iconic and the definitive representation that he was often asked to redraw other artists' depictions, and he worked on more Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, and whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which we have covered on this show before retiring. And that is the first story. The second 2 stories, which are are written potentially by Jerry Siegel. It's, again, not credited, not clear where someone has that idea, but that was indicated on the internet. And it is penciled and inked again by Kurt Schaffenberger, edited by Mort Weisinger. So let's talk about this first story.
Yes. So, tired of Lois always relying on him to save her, Superman decides to teach Lois a lesson. While she continues to put herself in dangerous situations with a mobster, drug smuggler, and octopus, Superman secretly saves her without letting Lois know. The trick works, and Lois thinks Superman has abandoned her and only wants to take safe assignments from now on. But when the mobster comes for revenge, Lois is finally saved by Superman. Only, plot twist, it's not Superman. It's Jimmy in disguise. Thinking Superman will now save her from now on, Lois jumps back into danger, leaving Superman pissed at Jimmy.
I don't even think that summary got to the best parts of this issue.
That's the broad strokes of this story.
So, first of all, I think one thing, and we haven't really talked about this, people who have existed on the internet for more than a decade remember the what was it called? Super Dickery, maybe? It was all about finding pages from early Superman issues where he is a quote-unquote dick, where he is a jerk person. And this issue is such a good example of that trope that existed. And a lot of people might not realize just how common a trope that was. Like, Superman really was a jerk.
Well,
and
this
in this
just
one,
came up,
he is.
This just came up in the Superman Christmas issue that we covered just around Christmas time, where Santa Claus gets like made to be super
he's
obese,
a jerk to Santa Claus.
and then Superman
Yes.
is like, no, and he keeps thinking Superman wants him to lose weight, and Santa's like, I've lost enough weight, and Superman's like, no, you haven't, and like Superman's eating an ice cream cone in front of Santa while Santa's exercising.
But he's not just stern and obnoxious to her.
Mm-hmm.
He's then like Clark and watching her and just thinking how badly she needs to be taught a lesson. And then the dog. Explain the dog plot, because it is really fun to read.
So Lois and Clark are going to a dog show to cover the dog show, which alone is kind of a weird thing. Then Lois spots like this drug smuggler who's putting opium into one of the dog trophies and is going to get that out. That too, very bizarre.
Yeah.
And Lois is going to go like confront him. And of course, Clark, Superman, is trying to teach him a lesson. So instead, there's like
Lois decides to have ice cream instead.
Lois also decides to have ice cream. Yes.
So she stops for ice cream, and this black dog appears out of nowhere, eats her ice cream, and dies because the ice cream was poisoned. Because the person selling the ice cream was trying to kill Lois.
Well, so Lois thinks. Like, that's not even the actual case, right? Yeah, because...
Well, I don't know. I can't tell if the poison is real.
No, that's not real. Like, he wants...
because they know Lois is onto them. Like, Clark keeps saying, the gangsters are going to get you. But you're right. I don't know. Maybe the poison is a setup, because what does it turn out? So the dog apparently dies.
First, we see this black dog die on screen, which, I mean, on panel, which is, like, kind of traumatic on
And there's an
itself.
excellent, I bet this panel was even taken by, what's his name, who copied all the comic images and is a famous artist.
Yes.
Why can neither of us think of his name? Doesn't matter. He copied other people's work, but there's this great panel. With the dead dog and Lois like with her hand on her face and tears coming down because she's looking at a dead dog.
Well, it turns out that the dog is not actually dead. It is, in fact, Krypto, which Superman has, 1, painted black, 2, used his ventriloquist powers to control.
to get Krypto to come eat the ice cream and play dead.
And then to get the paint off of him, he blowtorches the paint off of Krypto. So there's a lot going on there. One of the other fun lines I love is that the dog eats this ice cream, and then Lois was like, the ice cream must have been poisoned because there couldn't have been anything else in that ice cream that it could have hurt the dog. It is chocolate ice cream that they even specifically
and
say.
I thought it was going to be the opium. I thought the opium was going to be hidden in the ice cream.
Yeah, but I love that it's like, maybe they didn't know that chocolate was bad for dogs in the 60s, I guess, maybe.
I don't know. I mean, that's one of the ridiculous, like, I'm going to teach this broad a lesson moments.
Yeah.
But then Superman just, like, has Aquaman's pet octopus attack Lois Lane while she's skin diving for a story. I don't know what is going on. I mean, this is Jimmy Olsen level wackiness.
I
at
forget
this point.
what. There's like a treasure down there or something that police.
And so she thinks she's going to be killed by this octopus, which of course she's not, because it's a controlled experiment the whole time. So it just has the perfect level of Superman is such a jerk and Lois is stupidly in love with Superman.
And then I think the final reveal, which is that when Superman does save her in the end, it's in fact Jimmy. It actually was set up earlier because Lois actually makes a point that Jimmy has a box of costumes that she says very early on. So because she gets a window washer's costume to spy on the mobsters, and the only reason she's uncovered is because they spot her red fingernails, and they're like, there's no way a window washer could have red fingernails. But yes, then when I love the idea when Jimmy actually, he's uncovered, and then Superman does say to him, Jimmy, if they just shot a little higher.
Well, because he had a bulletproof vest.
He had a bulletproof vest.
So that the bullets would bounce off of him. And yes, I love the climax, the second to last panel is Superman telling him, like, they could have just shot your head. And Jimmy's like, oh my gosh, I could have died. Like, it's ridiculous and fun. And it is really funny that, again, this isn't the first issue of Superman's Girlfriend, but this story has so many echoes of that Superman girl, of Lois Lane girl reporter story in the early Superman. Like, just this question, again, as I mentioned earlier, of is she over reliant on him, and is he going to set better boundaries, which is ridiculous and just makes him a jerk. But that's sort of the plot here, and I think the plot of a lot of these titles, and even to the point where it has the like falling out of the window and will he save her as the trope, which is part of that Lois Lane girl reporter. So let's get to the cover story. So each issue had multiple stories, but had one featured on the cover, and this one, I'll describe the cover, is before you summarize it, we have Lois Lane again in a definitely lifted by Roy panel of Lois crying because she's watching Superman with a mer woman in a wheelchair with a child mer person in a cube, and they are a happy family. And Lois is so sad because on a secret, distant planetoid, he has a mermaid wife and a merman son, and that's why he won't marry her for all this time. So
I think we saw that
cover.
there was another issue that Lois became a mermaid or Lana became a mermaid. There was more mermaids involved.
Lois becomes a mermaid, and then, of course, there's the famous actual mermaid that Superman has a relationship with. So that's what, and she refers to that in the story even. So why don't you summarize this tale?
Well, with the help of a new super telescope, Lois sees that Superman secretly has a mermaid wife named Mookie and a mermaid / super son named Nipper on another planet. Lois is distraught and tells Superman off. The Man of Steel is determined to find out what's really going on, and eventually it's revealed through lots of flashbacks, lots of explanation, that the other Superman is in fact a robot, and so are Mookie and Nipper. Those three are left to live their life together, and Lois is once again back in love with the real Superman.
And dreams of as happy an existence as the robots have one day with Superman. Yeah. This, I can't even believe how ridiculous this story is. I don't know what to say or where to begin.
Yeah. Well, even the idea that Superman would have like this secret life, because it's like a story that you would see on like a Lifetime movie where like this guy actually has like this whole separate family that nobody hears about.
Well, and I love like that they, again, this is definitely where they know what they're doing, because they sort of lean into it for a bit. She's watching them, and I love like the sequence where he bakes a super pie with his heat vision, which is basically just like a big giant 12-foot round pie. Like, so she's watching his apparently happy life, and then I love the sequence where the mer child, who can just seemingly just float in the air. I don't know what is going on.
Going back to there, before you get to that part. So yeah, he bakes this pie, and then the next day at the Daily Planet, Lois says or sees Superman. It was like, "Oh, Superman, what did you do?
How difficult was your space mission?" And he says, "Easy as
it was
pie."
Easy as pie.
Right.
And she's like, "Ugh, that's jerk."
Right, because it leads to the second moment where she's watching again, and she sees the mer boy floating in the air, licking a giant lollipop. So makes no sense.
Yes.
Superman breaks the lollipop up. I guess
because he shouldn't be ruining
he's
his
not
dinner.
supposed to be eating it that much. And when he returns to Earth, she says, "I bet this mission was easy too." And he says, "It was as easy as taking candy from a baby." So she's convinced that this is proof what she's seeing on screen is therefore Superman with this mer family. But then it turns out that he goes there and they find out that it's this whole line of robots, which are canonical. These are canonical robots that Superman created, but he gives this whole backstory on how he created 4 of them. And we get a whole training montage, which is really fun, of how he trained the 4 of them to do different things.
Were these panels from previous issues? I don't think they were.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it, because I don't think they did stuff like that.
The art didn't change, and I don't think the artist was working on Superman proper. So I think they were made up for this.
No,
even
I
if
think
that
this was made up.
Canonical.
But he trains these robots. They're not affected by kryptonite, so he has them fake falling down if they see a green boulder. So that's a fun one. I like that he teaches them how to turn into Clark, and they have a signal so that they never get too close to each other, so that no one ever sees 2 Supermen next to each other. So he's really thought of everything. But then the story gets even more convoluted because Superman becomes invisible. And because of that, one of the robots goes to save some spacecraft and ends up on this planet.
Yeah, it gets partially destroyed. Yeah.
And so they're on the planet where there's a mermaid.
Then Mookie.
Mookie's living on a dry planet.
Yes.
And she can't find water. And she's in a wheelchair. I'm very confused by this.
Because she's got to get around. Feet. She can't.
I guess so. I don't know why. Well, I guess I do know why the sun can fly. Because it turns out that Mookie dies. It's
the real issue. Mookie dies. And she's like, I can't get. She fixes the Superman robot, but then she's like, I'm on my. At least I'm going to die, but at least I can save this one robot. And then it's like, and then she's dead. And then the Superman robot is like, okay, but she's dead, but she fixed me, so I'm gonna make a robot of her.
And he decides to complete it. They need a robot child, so he makes a robot child who has superpowers and is a merboy.
Yes.
And so that's the whole plot, is that this robot is living with this
because
robot.
Lois even says at one point before, because we get the Superman robot reveal, but we don't get the Mookie reveal right away. And then Lois says but robots and mermaids can't have children.
Yeah, it's this one is more like a Jimmy in the way that we were talking about last episode. Did you just throw a dart at a board to try to figure out the plot? In this one, it's like they drew out of a hat robots, mermaids, and
yes,
Lois Lane thinking Superman has a secret family. All right, let's make that plot and tie it all together.
Although I'd say the one issue with this one versus the previous story in the same issue is that Lois doesn't have a lot of agency or things to do in this one. In the other one, we see her kind of, she, maybe she's not always the brightest because she's really jumping into the deep end of the pool constantly, but she's going for it. And here it's just all she can think of is that Superman has this other family, and in the final part of the story, Lois almost has nothing to do because the whole thing is basically flashbacks
just
to how
exposition.
This all happened.
Oh yeah, it's exposition heavy, which stops it from being fun. It's too long, it's too dense, it's not a fun highlight. The first story, I think, is a good representative highlight of the fun you can have in Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. This one, I think, is
there's still bits there when Superman, one of my favorite lines here, because these all have such great lines, one of my favorite lines is when Superman does come back, the real Superman, to visit Lois. He says, "I've just come back from another space mission. Mind if I admire your baby blue eyes?" It's like, what? Talk about creepy. Like, are they... And they're not even... What's also weird is, doesn't Superman, like, not always want to be in a relationship with Lois? So why is he coming in saying, like, "I want to stare into your eyes, lady"?
I don't know what's going on. And then at the end, he says, "I'm happy we're friends again." Like, I guess because she was angry at him. So, yeah. That wraps up our first foray into Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane. It will surely not be our last.
Yeah, because I think we were just flipping through, and there's one where, like... she becomes overweight, and I mean, there's so many different like there's like, again, like dark.
They go from like, Jimmy Olsen wacky to like really quite dark. She's killing Superman with her kiss. She emits kryptonite so they can't be together. I mean, it gets really fun. It's such a fun subversion. I mean, we talked about Jimmy Olsen being inspired by Archie, clearly visually and maybe tonally to a certain extent. This is in the same way, I think, being inspired by romance comics, but putting it in a superhero universe, which is really fun. And
well, and also some of those sci-fi and to a lesser extent horror comics. Like I saw there's one issue where Lois gets a typewriter, and the typewriter can write someone's obituary before they've actually died, and of course then it writes her obituary, and she like sees how she's gonna die, and that's like such a classic like Tales from the Crypt kind of setup, but just put onto Lois Lane. So I think those romance stories, those kind of sci-fi fantasy stories, those horror stories, all kind of the light version of those, but they were able to put this into this world. Or
the classic trope of becoming the person you love and the person you're jealous of's baby, which is great. That's an issue we're going to cover
There's
one day.
There's a couple of baby
where Lois becomes,
there. Yeah.
But she becomes Lana and Clark's Superman's
she becomes the baby, but then Superman also becomes her baby, which is like the inverse.
Superman bottle feeding her while she's thinking as a baby how much she hates Lana. It's such
I thought you were going to say
issue.
When she is providing corporal punishment to Superman's butts,
and her arm hurts.
When Superman's a baby and her arm hurts because he's got buns of steel. And it's like, there's a lot of... And all of this, of course, is like the person you have a crush on. So there's a lot of weirdness going on.
We'll cover lots of it. But before we do, we've got a third segment.
Yes, it's time to ponder some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted?
So, Guido, what are we talking about for pondering possibilities?
It's our first foray into Lois, so let's talk a little bit more. After the end of this title, she's in Superman's family, and then she has a 2-issue miniseries in 1986. It's actually something we should cover at some point. It has incredible gray Morrow art. It's written by Mindy Newell. It's most famous, though, because it has a dead child on the first issue, on the cover. It is quite dark.
Not a dead baby Superman.
No, a dead child. And it's quite dark. And it's the same year as, like, Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. So I was reading a great article about this title and how it sort of should be considered in that of the era of dark superhero stuff. Outside of that, it's really Flashpoint where she gets her own title focus. And after that, back in the core universe, Greg Rucka most recently wrote a kind of 12-issue, I think, maxi series of her. So we haven't had a lot of ongoings. Recently, she's, spoiler, Superwoman in the main title, but not a lot spinning off with her. My first question is, do you think she can carry an ongoing title?
Oh, yes, I think completely.
Why don't they do one?
Sexism.
Simple answer.
Yeah, I mean, because again, like when you think of her compared to other like female counterparts, like Mary Jane Watson, for example, like that's not a character that you would necessarily see have a soloed part, but like Lois is like this investigative reporter, and I think when you look to like that, it was Superman, the TV shows was Superman and Lois and Clark. Like she has as much agency as the guy with all that basically can do anything in the world. So I think like,
and the
that
Rucka
shows,
maxi series, which is the most recent, does that. It's really focused on her investigative journalism. It really tells a story that has little to do with Superman, which is good. But yeah, I don't know why we haven't gotten an ongoing.
I think I haven't read that
post movie,
but I think maybe something that has a bit of like a All the President's Men spotlight kind of flavor to it. And like I even think of like, even seeing her in like a comic strip form where she's also kind of investigating that. I could see that there, like a Mary Worth or in that ilk. So I'm surprised that we have not seen something that kind of follows that aspect of it.
It is funny that there isn't a daily strip of her. There probably could be. Not that daily in fact strips saw that popular, but
they included a daily in my research. They did include a daily strip, but it only ran for literally like 12 strips.
Oh, gosh.
And it was like what they did with Dick Tracy. It was like a addendum to the Superman strip, but it must not have been very successful because it did not even last a year.
Well, on screen in just a few months from when we're recording, we're going to see Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane. What do we want to see from Lois in this new iteration of the universe?
Well, I think, and we both loved Rachel Brosnahan on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and I think that kind of quick-witted, and also that character was obviously from like the 50s and 60s, and I think we so much of associate just that way of talking, like we talked about earlier, with Lois Lane as well. So I think if they can take some of that from that character and put it into her portrayal here, it's very much how I kind of hear Lois in my head.
Do we want a Superman Clark Lois triangle, or do you want her to know?
I would like to go back to the triangle, and the reason why is because a lot of the recent versions have avoided it. The Snyder verse, even the Bryan Singer Superman Returns, and then Superman and Lois on television as well, have all kind of avoided the love triangle aspect. So I do think it could be time to kind of go back to that core original
to her not knowing
approach. What do you think? Yeah. Do you want that, or do you want her to know?
It's hard because I know people have talked exhaustively about this for decades. It's hard because you have to suspend so much disbelief in order for that to work. Like, there's not a good way for you to believe that she can't tell.
But I think what they did well on Superman and Lois is that, like, Lois knew, but you have that suspension of disbelief for everyone else. Like, Lana,
that makes more sense because everyone,
them.
Like, when you see someone on TV, it's like a celebrity. Like, if you see them walking down the street, you might not even recognize them. Like, I think that makes more sense. But the person in this world, let's assume they're not living together yet, but they're working together. If you worked with someone all day and had feelings for them, I don't see how you wouldn't recognize them with just a slight shift in appearance. So I think that's where you have a suspension of disbelief that has to come in.
Though he will have like a magic dog in this one too. So I mean, a superhero dog. So like,
yeah, and there could be even some explanation, or there could be something. I mean, sadly for them, happily for us, David Corenswet's hair looks awesome as Clark and Superman, but it doesn't look very different either in either iteration. So I'm curious if she'll know, or if she'll maybe know herself but not get it confirmed. It'll be like that kind of dynamic.
Which is kind of what they do in the original 78 movie. Like, she finds out, but then they turn back time to like have her not know what actually happens. But like it was almost like an acknowledgement in the Donner film where it's like, if she's this smart, she's got to figure it out. But then we want to go back, reset
we'll trick her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, I'm expecting that I'm going to like this performance a lot. I think what I loved about my buddy Bitsy's performance is just how much care and strength she had. I think what we know can often become a trope and a caricature is the sassy woman, right? Like that can almost become a two-dimensional thing.
Yes.
I do not have any thought that Rachel Brosnahan and James Gunn are going to let that happen here, but I think that's what Bitsy Tulloch did so well, is she's this loving, emotional core. She has feelings, they vary, she's sad, but she's strong, she's capable, she has agency, she's independent and loves her family. Like she's so fully human, and I think that'll be the case here, but I would want to make sure she's fully human because, yeah, I think she's a character who could easily be played one note. And again, I don't have any expectation that that's going to be the case here, but I want her to be fully human.
Just like Amy Adams portrayed her.
God.
No offense to Amy Adams. She's perfectly. I don't think that was her fault.
No, but that was terrible. Yes, and very underdeveloped. So, yeah, and I wouldn't mind some Superman's girlfriend level hijinks, as we've talked about on every episode we're going to do about DC imaginary stories at this point. Turn it into a Harley Quinn cartoon.
Exactly. Well,
so let's
now
get
that we've covered
Lois Lane wacky.
Now that we've covered this and Jimmy, like you could do like kind of what they used to do on classic Warner Brothers cartoons, where it's like maybe the hijinks can't sustain all 30 minutes, but you do like
so here's an
8
minute story, 8-minute story.
Exactly. Yeah. Do either one for Jimmy, one for Lois, or just mix and match them. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would not mind that. But in the meantime, that is a wrap, dear watchers. Thank you for listening. I have been girl reporter Guido.
And I have been Superman's girlfriend, Rob.
And you can follow us on all social media, dear watchers. The reading list is in the show notes.
Give us a 5-star review wherever you listen, and we'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
Keep pondering the possibilities.
I can't tell a lie, and that's probably why, but I wish I had tried to deceive you a little from the start.